train teachers and I train youth workers, social workers. So I don't sit in rooms with boys anymore. I did many years of that in secondary. And I developed the program while I was still working in secondary with groups of 14, 15, 16-year-old boys. In 2021, I left school and set up Men at Work and have been training professionals ever since. And I've trained 3,000 since 2021, bulk of which are secondary teachers, followed closely by social workers, youth offending, mental health, police, and primary school teachers. And I'm noticing a surge in demand from primary, which has been kind of alluded to earlier. So essentially, the model that I operate is to give confidence, skills, and resources to those who work with boys and young men who know them, because I think that's the best delivery model. If you're a teacher, you could know a young man from being 11 to 18 or 19. Or if you've got an all through school, it could be 3 or 4 years old, even up to 11 or 18 years. That for me is the person best placed and thoroughly trained and thoroughly immersed in the life of the school to be dispersing these kind of ongoing dialogic support. That's how I see things. So I don't do going into school, talking to boys and going away because I don't personally find that would leave me feeling satisfied or I've done the right thing. But I understand the industry, and that's what that is. It's grown up over the last 15 years. Mims, sorry, just to pick you up on the choking thing. That was a story that I broke actually. That was in Bridgend, and there's more of that to come. We can be absolutely certain. There are various journalists working on that. And it's very symptomatic, really, of the way that the PSHE world, the Wild West of the PSHE world, has been left unregulated for forever. And there is very little critical scrutiny of the content of what goes in. And we can easily see how schools fall vulnerable to unqualified, ideologically quack kind of input. That's just a reality that I'm sure we all kind of have picked up on that, and we're variously keen to talk about it or not. But I'm very happy to take that front and centre, and we'll be doing for the next few years. Anyway, so I train teachers, youth workers, social workers, anybody who knows boys, including prison officers. I was in HMP Hull last week. That was an interesting day, and I'm going to HMP Gartree, and I've worked in HMP Peterborough as well. I also deliver 16 to 20-week programs via Women's Aid with adult male domestic abuse perpetrators, which I find fascinating. So basically, in the last 20 years, I've had a kind of a mad crash course, starting in secondary in 2004. God, you imagine what your phone was like in 2004. Did you even have one? How heavy was it? How big was it? What could you do with it? Nothing is the answer, probably. And then over the years, we started seeing in schools, like in safeguarding referrals and about incidents, just stuff popping up on our radar, almost like tracking the cultural shift. So that by the late teens, 2016, 2017, 2018, dick pics were absolutely normal and every day. Coercive kind of relationships being used via technology, all kinds of stuff. That the impact of porn, which is it's a short word and people often overlook it. Porn is absolutely the #1 misogynistic propaganda. There is no question about that. And we're at the start of the cultural impacts of it, and we're not ready for it. I would recommend anybody has a really good look at the work of Gail Dines, a British academic, Gail Dines, D-I-N-E-S, who now works in America, and her program is called Culture Reframe. And it's about looking at the scientific aspects of the impacts of porn, but also about the corrosive effects on psychology of everybody. Boys and girls are now basically in the crosshairs of a multi-billion-dollar industry, and that can't be over-egged, that pudding. So when in my work every day, like today, for example, I was just working with about a dozen people who work with youth charities, schools, safeguarding leads. That's a usual kind of group of people. And sometimes I would spend a day in a school. Could be a public school, ones that look like Hogwarts, or it could be ones that look like the school in adolescence. A typical week will be one of those after another, then a PRU, then a primary school, then a prison. and lots of other things that begin with P. It's a totally mix, absolute mix. One thing I do notice about the way we talk about issues with boys and young men is we tend to think it's always a working class problem, that the issues of working class boys on estates. I can attest that that is not true. I was working with some NHS, a kind of a low level, below the radar group of NHS staff up north the other day, and we're talking about incidents of sexual harassment, and they clearly cluster around surgeons. Now, surgeons tend to come from classes A to B. I was in a very, very well-known public school the other day, and they said they were scared of talking to their sixth form boys because they sensed it was a pool of rage. So, class is fascinating. When we look at the campaigns, the Sadiq Khan's campaign, and Andy Burnham, and the Scottish one, don't be that guy. They tend to represent Cockneys and Manx and Scousers and Geordies, builders, men on the street. That's a really limiting view of what is a very deeply pervasive situation through all classes, all ethnicities.
Sorry to intervene.
Yeah.
One of the things we're trying to come up with is what are the positive messages for boys, and therefore, right, by implication, what are the non-positive messages for boys?
Sure.
Can we make sure that we've got space for that?
Yeah, for sure. Well, the positive message is the one that's delivered by the teachers, the youth workers, the social workers, that we are here for you. Your safety is paramount. The program is this: be safe to be around. But it starts with you being safe as a boy and as a young man. You matter, you're human, you're complex, you're vulnerable. Much of what you find in the world will try and persuade you otherwise. But we're here as adults, reliable, dependable, familiar faces with trust. We know you. We will walk with you through the storm of stuff that is coming for you. And that's, I think, a positive message, that they're not alone, that they're seen, and that people with, proper grounding in safeguarding are wanting to have specific conversations with them, not generic young people, not gender-free anything, sex-specific conversations with males, young men, because that matters. And just a really clear illustration of that is if we think about young people, a lot of our boys and girls are vulnerable to grooming into county lines. So, that's a national issue. But the work that boys and young men do in their gangs and county lines is different to the work that is done by girls and young women in county lines and gangs. Therefore, we need to be sex specific in our conversations. And I think showing up for our boys, saying, we see you as young men and as boys, and we're here for you, and we know that the world is speaking to you as a boy and a young man, and that's okay that we do the same. So unapologetically sex-specific work with boys and young men, because they matter. They are material beings that matter, and so do women and girls. But if we start our conversation with boys and young men, we express our trust and our care for them. We're discharging our safeguarding, because risk is not generic. If we all went to the doctors and they gave each one of us the same medicine, and we were all sat in the waiting room and knew we all had different ailments, we would think the doctor was a quack, and we would think that we hadn't been seen and we didn't matter. So we have to see boys or talk to them as boys and young men in their world. And the best people, I think, who are placed to do that, the people who know them the best. So hopefully that's a hopeful thing, being seen that you exist and that your material existence is there, and that you're not just being seen as vague kind of fog of young people, but you are you. And we're here to talk to you because you matter. So I find that quite positive. But other people will probably think otherwise. But that's okay. So it's sex-specific work. It's Equality Act protected, absolutely. As I think work with girls should be too. Natasha.
Yeah, go ahead, Natasha.
Thank you so much, Michael. That's
really genuinely interesting. But I was just wondering what your thoughts were on so outside of school and youth services, because I think sometimes with school can seem as a sort of this you know what I mean, that kind of place of authority,
Yeah,
authoritarian. There we go, place where you don't have trusted relationships. That's where youth workers and youth services used to come into the equation. But
yeah.
where we've had a decline in that over multiple years, and the government's trying to build it back. How do you think this sort of, you know, like you said, gender or sex specific language or sex specific design could be embedded in the next step in the government strategy to rebuild youth services? Because it sounds to me that we've got an opportunity now to design these for the modern world and
Yeah.
to take into account all the things we've already learned. So what should that look like?
I think it should look like training people, the people who will have regular contact, familiar people rather than passing comments, people who have regular contact with and are kind of contactable and can pick up on dialogues over time, over months, over years, that they have training in approaching dialogues, constructive dialogues with boys and young men that avoid multiple obvious pitfalls, like making them feel accused, making them feel inherently bad, making them feel that there is something broken, or they're subject to original sin. I don't use the term toxic masculinity either, apart from to critique it with professionals. If a boy talks about it, then of course I always would do, because they brought it into the room. But I think it's a phrase from a group of white men in New York in 1985. It jumped the shark, and now it's been used counterproductively in classrooms up and down the country. So I think it's a very poor phrase. However, there are some really dangerous behaviours and beliefs and values out there. And that's why we mustn't build obstacles of jargon to get to the dialogue, because this is life and death for some of our boys and girls. It matters phenomenally. So I think clear language. So Natasha, to come back to your question, clear language. Wouldn't it be wonderful if the youth service was de-decimated? Because that's what's happened to it for the last 12 years. Absolutely atrocious, isn't it? Um, Training to have a common sense, practical approach for conversations, dialogues with boys, creating space intentionally about what it feels like to them in the here and now to be invited by the voices of culture to be a man. What does it mean? What are the expectations of them? What are the punishments? What are the permissions? Where do they get the chance to make sense of it? Unless it's too late and we're telling them off. We want young men to have positive vision for the future, but we never seem to spell it out. We just seem to say we don't want the bad stuff. I mean, of course we don't want the bad stuff. But if somebody was working with my son, I would want to read something that they'd taken them to care to tell me as a parent or carer, to say we want your son to take part in X. It's about personal development. It's about developing good friendships. It's about understanding healthy relationships. It's about autonomy. It's about honesty, emotional literacy, but also decision making and communication skills. Telling the good story of what we actually want for our boys, because that will help us build a roadmap there. And I fear that we're stuck in loops. I'm really worried that the incontinent response to adolescence will cause more problems than it solves. I really, that is not, I signed the open letter against it. It's a very, very bad idea. Anyway, we are where we are. So, Natasha, my answer is this: practical, jargon free, boy centered, materially realistic, honest, no quackery. What is going on in your life? Tell me more about it. I'm interested and I'm here for you. That's it.